Hello, welcome to the part 2 of our oil spill cleanup training delivered by Osha Safety Consult Nigeria Limited, ATP Osha Academy. So today we'll be talking on the impacts of the oil spill on the environment, where we'll be discussing the environmental damage, habitat affected. Then also we'll talk about the exposure to toxic components associated with oil spill. We'll be discussing nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxide, carbon dioxide, as well as carbon monoxide. Now on the impacts of the environment. Now the different types of crude and refined product have different kind of physical and chemical properties that affect the way oil spread and how they react or affect the environment and the man-made resources. You understand? There are certain factors that aid the spreading of oil, and they include the surface tension, gravity, as well as viscosity. Now, the surface tension is basically talking about the attraction between the oil and the water. You understand? The attraction between the oil and the water. Now, the higher the surface tension of the oil, the more likely the spill will remain in place. That is to say, it will not flow, or it will have a reduced flow effect. You understand? Now, when we are talking about the high surface tension, we are referring to those heavy crudes or heavy oil, as discussed in our previous lesson, talking about the diesel or the your normal engine oil, you understand, that are usually very thick. Such oil have high surface tension, and when they come in contact with the water bodies, there's a tendency for them not to flow or to spread fast. You understand? They remain mostly in place. Then also, when the surface tension is low, referring to those light oil that we spoke about, like your kerosene. When the surface tension is low, there is tendency for such oil to spread fast, even without the aid of winds or water current. For instance, the kerosene, when you put it in contact with water, before you know it, it spread because it is a light oil. So the surface tension is usually not high, which aid it to flow. Then also it say which aid it to spread. I mean to say, it say oil is more likely to spread in warmer waters than in cold water. You understand? When the water is warm, it aid it in spreading as well. Then also the specific gravity. And the specific gravity is basically talking about the density of the oil compared to the water. You understand? How heavy the oil is compared to the water. You understand? Now, basically, in most oil are usually lighter than water, which is the reason why you see oil floating on water. You understand? Because the density of the water is higher than the oil. Hence, the oil remains on top of the water. It says, however, if the specific gravity of an oil spill can increase if the lighter substance within the oil evaporates. You understand? When the oil spill on the water and the lighter substance evaporates, the residue that are left behind settle, and there is a reduced flow of those residue. You understand? Because of their heavier gravity or density. Now, this viscosity is basically talking about the resistance of oil to flow. Like we spoke about the heavy crude oil, you understand, like our engine oil. They are heavy and they are usually slow or resistant to flow. Then habitats that are being affected. Now, the bird is one of the most common species that is usually being affected by this oil spill on water, especially those water-loving birds that live around the water region. They are mostly being affected. For most of them, when they come in contact with this oil water, their ability to fly is usually affected, you understand? And this can be dangerous for them. And in most cases, it leads to them being drowned in the river and also dying afterwards due to inability to live normally. Even for some certain birds that tend to feed on prey on the water, you understand, they are also being affected because most of the prey in the water become affected due to that oil. And when they feed on them, in the long run, they end up also dying as well. Also, some of the birds, when they are fed up, become sticked with the oil, they try to use their beak to pick it off during preening, you understand? As a result, most of these oil particles are being ingested, which can also lead to their death as well. So most of these animals these species of bird are usually affected. Most of them end up dying as a result of starvation. They can no longer live normally and feed normally, and in the long run they die of starvation, you understand? So most of them are heavily affected, and in some cases attempts are made to try and clean up this bed when they come in contact with this oil, but for most of them, despite that, they end up dying. And for those that do not die, for most birds, they end up being unable to breathe, you understand? They can no longer join the breathing birds, you understand? They become unproductive. The only bird or bird, which is a penguin, are the ones that are known to be resistant, to have some sort of resistance to this oil spill in waters, understand? After they are being cleaned up, they also have a tendency of still breathing normally. The another habitat that is affected is the rocks. Now, when this oil wash offshore, there is tendency for it to get mixed with rocks on the floor. The oil becomes stick to the rocks on the floor and even the sand as well. Now, this makes it to be slippery, which is a danger or a hazard to most response workers. And also the plant life. When this oil moves to the coastal marshes and the mangroves, they tend to damage the whole lot of them, you understand? Most of these plants absorb the chemicals on these oils, and eventually they die off, and that the whole of that plant life becomes on becomes very not too good for a lot of wildlife. You understand? Then also the marine lives are also affected adversely. Most of the animals that lives on water are mostly affected. Talking about the fishes and the rest of them. At the end of the day, most of them either they die due to the chemicals alone, while others die as a result of ingesting some of these chemicals. You understand? So most of the marine lives are also affected as well. So exposure to toxic components. Now, one of the toxic components associated with oil spill is the nitrogen dioxide, which is NO2. So it's a distinctive reddish brown color gas, you understand? And it's usually explosion usually occur from combustible engine exhaust, which carries a diesel fumes. Talking about those combustible engines that uses diesel, you understand? They are mostly the kind of machines that emit this nitrogen dioxide. Then the health risk of nitrogen dioxide, I said, respiratory is an respiratory irritant and is capable of causing pulmonary edema. Talking about a lung condition where there is excess fluid in the lungs, understand? So this nitrogen dioxide can actually lead to that particular condition where there will be excess fluid in your lung, which is called the pulmonary edema. Then also say concentration of 50 ppm, which is part per million. ppm talking about the measurement parameter for measuring the amount of chemical or contaminant per volume of water, you understand? They say a concentration of 50 ppm is moderately irritating to the eyes and the nose. So it may cause pulmonary edema and possibly subacute and chronic lesion in the lungs, you understand? Which is also a lung condition. They say odor and of NO2 is first perceptible to most people in the range of 0.11 to 0.22 ppm. Now, the occupational exposure limit, talking of the OEL, so the exposure limit standard regulated by Osha and other agencies for NO2 range from 1 to 5 ppm for a short 15 minutes exposure period and 3 to 5 ppm average over a longer 8-hour exposure period. That is to say, the limit of exposure that is allowed to this NO2 is for 15 minutes is within 1 to 5 part per million, you understand? And an average of 3 to 5 part per million in a longer 8-hour exposure, you understand? So for 8-hour exposure, the average amount of NO2 that is expected for you to be exposed to in 8 hours is an 3 to 5 ppm. And for 15 minutes, you are expected to be exposed to just 1 to 5 ppm, which is 5 amount of the amount that you should be exposed to in 15 minutes. Understand? And they say workers should be informed that OEL based on standard time are not appropriate for monitoring. Now, this time that are given above, this standard time that are given above, they said is not applicable to monitoring. You understand? And they also said OEL do not include skin contact, absorption, ingestion, which are common in cleanup. That is to say, if your exposure to this chemical is leading to skin contact, where your skin has to come in contact with it, or it's whereby you may be absorbing the chemical or ingesting it in whatever way. These standards do not apply to it. This OEL do not apply to it, is what this place is basically trying to talk about. So another toxic chemical that you can be exposed to as a result of crude oil activities or oil spill is the sulfur dioxide, also known as SO2 now. So it is released during crude oil burning and during degradation. That's talking about when crude oil is being burned and produced into different refined products. During that process, this sulfur oxide is omitted. You understand? So its emission and also precursor to acid rain and atmospheric particulates. You understand? That is to say, most of its emission leads to acid rain, a situation whereby acid elements fall down with rain or snow or fog or any other falling element. You understand? So this acid rain comes with them as well as a result of this sulfur dioxide. So the health risk of sulfur dioxide is a short-term exposure to SO2 ranging from 5 minutes to 24 hours can cause adverse respiratory effects, including bronchoconstriction and increased asthma symptoms. Understand? Bronchoconstriction is a situation whereby the bronchus of the lungs, which carry air to and fro the lungs, become constricted, leading to difficulty in breathing, just like the asthma as well. So when reacting with other compounds in the atmosphere to form small particles, they can penetrate deeply into sensitive part of the lungs and cause or worsen respiratory disease such as emphysema and bronchitis. Emphysema talking about difficulty in breathing, and bronchitis talking about inflammation of the bronchus, which also lead to difficulty in breathing as well. So it aggravates existing heart disease, leading to increasing hospital admission and premature deaths. Now, its occupational exposure limits are set by the Environmental Protection Agency is a 24-hour primary standard at 140 parts per billion and an annual average of 30 parts per billion and a set 3 hours average secondary standard at 500 parts per billion. You understand? Talking about the amount you are allowed to expose to at a particular time limit. You understand? Then also the next chemical we're talking about is the carbon dioxide, which is the CO2. Says it is colorless and at low concentration it is odorless, while at high concentration it is sharp and has acidic odor. It's also been emitted. It's also been emitted from the combustion of engines and also controlled burning, just like with the nitrogen that we spoke about earlier. Can be emitted when you are burning engines, the use of combustible engines, especially those that use diesel fuels, you understand. When you are using those such engines, you emit this carbon dioxide and also through controlled burning as well. So the health risk of carbon dioxide. Said CO2 is an asphyxiant and an irritant. You understand? Now, asphyxiant are chemicals that replace oxygen in the air. You understand? They have the ability to replace oxygen in the air, which is the reason why we breathe in oxygen and we emit carbon dioxide. So it replaces oxygen. Now that makes it a very dangerous chemical as well, especially in confined uh, places or confined spaces. It becomes a very dangerous chemical. Now there was a case of a family some years back that slept close to a generator. Understand? Then in the morning, it was observed that the entire family died. So basically, what happened was that the CO2 that was being emitted by that generator replaced the oxygen in that room, which eventually led to the death of that family. So this makes it a very dangerous gas or a chemical as well. Then it said when it is inhaled, it can produce a sore taste in the mouth and stinging sensation in the nose and throat. So the occupational exposure limit for this carbon dioxide, say amount above 5,000 parts per million are considered very unhealthy, and those above 50,000 parts per million, which is equal to 5% of volume, is considered dangerous as well. So finally, another chemical that is associated with oil spill is the carbon monoxide. Now, the carbon monoxide has no warning properties. It is colorless and it is odorless. So you may be exposed to the carbon monoxide without even knowing. You understand? I said may be present in any of these activities that uses gasoline, diesel, or propane powered machineries. You understand? Then also working near operating equipment. Any equipment that is working, operating, and also have the possibility of having carbon monoxide. It may be a grinding machine, it may be a washing machine, as long as it's an operating process, may have a tendency of carbon monoxide. Then also sites where machines are being used to clear debts and all that. There may also be tendency of carbon monoxide being present. And when you are working near hot areas, understand, like using a machine to cut down a tree or cut irons or during your wedding, especially in confined spaces, carbon monoxide may also be present as well. Then also say controlling the CO exposure. So always ensure to wear your CO monitoring equipment. Understand? Because you do not know, you cannot perceive or does not have any odor for you to identify that it is present. So it is best you are always protected, wearing your monitoring equipment to get protected. Especially if you are working with machines that uses gas, diesel, and propane. It's always very smart for you to put on things, equipment that will prevent you from being exposed to the carbon monoxide. And I said also do not use gas or diesel power equipment indoors or in enclosed area, just like the instance I gave you of that family that died as a result of sleeping close to their generator and inhaling some of the chemicals that were emitted from that generator. Then also say you should use forced ventilation. Understand, like your AC, your expeller, things that will bring air into the such environment where you are being working with such CO2, with all the tendency of CO2 being exposed. You understand? So we end here for today. Next week we'll be meeting for the concluded part of our lecture on this oil spill cleanup training. So thank you very much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.